The message came as a voice note. Callista's preferred method, brisk and controlled, with just enough sugar to coat the steel. I was sipping my morning tea when it buzzed in the sound, oddly loud in the quiet of my kitchen. Hey, Lorraine, just a heads up, we're doing a little reunion/getaway thing next month. Nothing formal, just some of our closest friends and family. More of a friend thing this year, really. Super casual, you'd probably be bored with all the noise and chaos. But we'll send pictures. I replayed it twice, unsure if I'd imagined the slight lilt of satisfaction in her tone. But it was there, that familiar little smirk tucked between syllables. No formal invitation, no gentle request to join. Just the kind of well-packaged exclusion Callista was a master at delivering. I waited a few minutes thinking Marek might follow up with a call or a text. Something. Nothing came. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My thumb hovered over the phone screen, tempted to call back and pretend I hadn't quite understood. But I did. I understood it perfectly. This wasn't the first time I'd been nudged to the edge of the family photo. Holidays kept small for sanity birthdays, somehow forgotten until the day after. At first, I'd rationalized it, young parents' busy lives. But the pattern was too neat, too frequent. And now, I wasn't even worth the pretense. I walked to the back window and stared out at the late spring sky. The trees were starting to blush green again, and I could almost smell the salt wind that rolled off the water down at the coast. I used to dream of having everyone under one roof again, grandchildren running through the hallways, Marek laughing the way he used to as a boy, Callista letting her guard down long enough to be warm. I let those dreams go a few years ago, but this, the deliberate phrasing, the quiet cut, it wasn't disappointment anymore. It was something colder, something final. I closed the message and set the phone down, but the words still echoed, more of a friend thing. The next morning, a message arrived from my neighbor out east, and everything shifted. The photo came mid-morning. My neighbor Inez, always the early riser, had sent it with a single line of commentary. Looks like your place is about to be lively. I tapped the image open. Sunlight glinted off the windshield of a black SUV as it pulled up beside the dune grass. I recognized the pavers, the porch swing, even the half-dead rosemary bush I kept meaning to replace. There, stepping out of the passenger side, with arms full of monogrammed beach bags, was Callista. I stared at the image for a long time. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe she was visiting someone nearby. But Inez wasn't careless. If she said my place, she meant it. I dialed Angela, the property manager I'd worked with on and off for the last 3 years. We had an agreement during the off-season. Or, when I traveled, she handled the house's short-term bookings through a private agency. It kept the place active without tying me down. Lorraine, everything all right, she chirped. I just got a photo from my neighbor, I said, slowly. Is the house rented? Right now? There was a brief pause as she clicked through her system. Yes, booked through the agency last month. It's a week-long stay. Full payment received. I took a breath. And under what name? Another pause. Let me see. Callista Vale. Does that ring a bell? I smiled then. It was small, quiet, involuntary. Vale Callista's maiden name. Clever, subtle. She's my daughter-in-law, I said. Oh, Angela replied, caught off guard. Well, I'm sure she didn't realize. No, I said gently. I'm sure she didn't. Angela stammered something about anonymity clauses, privacy protections, how owners are rarely identified. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the photo again. There was Marek now, dragging a rolling cooler. I saw his face for only a moment before he turned, but it was enough. He looked tired, detached. They had rented my home, had driven hours to spend a full week under a roof they believed belonged to someone else. I stood and began packing a weekend bag. I folded a weekend's worth of clothes into the canvas bag I kept for last-minute trips. Cotton blouses, linen pants, 2 pairs of shoes, one, practical one, not. I added my old journal, a pen, and the small carved box that held Aunt Maeve's key. It still had the ribbon she tied around it the day she gave it to me. That house had always felt like a whisper between us. Maeve didn't have children of her own, and she said once that she knew I'd understand how to keep the place alive. Not just dusting and linens, dear, she'd told me. Its soul, the quiet in its bones. When she died, I thought the house might become my anchor. But grief rearranges plans, and life had drifted me elsewhere. Still, I kept it, maintained it, paid the taxes, and let it breathe through gentle seasons of silence. I never put it up online myself. It felt vulgar, but when Angela approached me about a high-end agency with vetted guests and privacy clauses, I said yes. Now, Callista was there, with Marek, with their curated circle of acceptable people, their matching towels and gelled smiles. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. What I felt was something slower, a sort of reverberation, like hearing a piano string plucked in another room and knowing it came from a song you used to play. The drive was familiar, but I took my time. Let the roads unfold like old maps. I passed the antique shop Maeve and I used to visit on rainy weekends, the cliff overlook where we once sat with coffee and nothing to say. Clouds gathered as I neared the coast, heavy and pewter-colored, pressing low over the treetops. The air had that thick, charged scent of a storm approaching, though the wind hadn't yet committed. I pulled into the gravel drive just before noon and turned off the engine. From where I sat, I could hear the clatter of laughter from the back deck, Callista's voice, unmistakable, even above the wind picking up through the trees. I stepped out of the car and walked around to the front porch, the key warm in my palm. I stood at the edge of the dune path for a few minutes before approaching. From that slight elevation, I could see the whole deck, laid out like a scene from one of those glossy lifestyle magazines Callista probably kept stacked in her kitchen. Everything was coordinated: white cushions, pale blue table runners matching lanterns that hadn't yet been lit but already announced intention. Callista was in the center, of course. She wasn't lounging. She was directing, gesturing with one hand while holding a stemless wine glass in the other. Her voice rose above the ambient hum, effortlessly in charge. Guests nodded. Someone laughed on cue. Marek moved in the background, lugging a cooler toward the side gate. He didn't look up. He almost never did anymore. On the table near the deck's sliding door, I saw a small arrangement of frames, family photos, by the look of it. I stepped a little closer, staying behind the shrub line, the wind rustling just enough to cover my approach. There they were, the Walkers in Colorado, the Walkers at Marek's wedding, the Walkers at Ava's first birthday. I recognized every image. I had been in many of them, once, but now cropped, trimmed, replaced. In one, I saw just the edge of my hand still lingering on Marek's shoulder before it cut off abruptly. Another showed a faint shadow that could have been me. I stepped back. It was almost funny, the precision of the erasure. Ava sat on the far end of the deck, away from the chatter. Her sketch pad was open, in her lap pencil, moving lightly across the page. She looked up once toward the path, but didn't see me. Or maybe she did, and chose not to react. Either way, she turned back to her drawing. I didn't linger. I walked down the side path toward the porch, the sand shifting beneath my shoes. At the front steps, I paused only to brush the windblown salt from my sleeve. Then I pulled the key from my bag, slid it into the lock, and turned it. The door opened with the familiar click I'd always remembered. The door swung open, as it always had, the same soft resistance and click of the latch. Inside, the cool air greeted me tinged with rosemary and ocean salt. Conversation drifted in from the deck, chatter, laughter, clinking glass. I took a breath, stepped across the threshold, and walked toward the open sliding door. My entrance wasn't dramatic. I didn't raise my voice or pause for effect. I simply appeared, and in that quiet arrival, the entire atmosphere cracked. The laughter cut out first, then came the gasp, sharp and involuntary, from someone near the table. Callista froze, mid-sentence, her mouth still open, around a word that never landed. A wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered at her feet. I stood in the doorway, letting the silence settle before I spoke. I hope you're all enjoying your stay in my home, I said. Every head turned. Marek looked stricken. Ava's eyes widened. And Callista, her expression didn't quite know what to do. It flickered between confusion, recognition, and something close to panic. Ava moved first. She stood so quickly her chair tipped, then ran to me without hesitation, throwing her arms around my waist. I knew you'd come, she whispered. I held her for a second longer than I meant to, then kissed the top of her head and let her go. Callista stepped forward, voice brittle. Lorraine, we didn't know this must be a mix-up. The rental company. There's no mix-up, I said evenly, addressing everyone now. You rented the house through a management agency, under the name Callista Vale, if I'm not mistaken. They handled it like any other client. They didn't know the name Halden was mine. She opened her mouth and closed it again. I saw the booking. I continued. I could have canceled, but I didn't. I thought it might be interesting to see what happened when you all realized where you were. Marek's face had gone pale. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I turned slightly, taking in the deck, the glasses, the matching cushions. I walked fully into the room, setting my bag down on the table nearest the door. Make yourselves at home, I said. After all, you already have. Dinner passed in careful increments, clinking forks, shallow questions, compliments on the view. No one mentioned my arrival, and no one looked directly at me for too long. I responded to every inquiry with soft warmth, never once raising the subject myself. Let them squirm in their restraint. Callista was precise with her smiles. They curved at the right moments, but never reached her eyes. She took deliberate care, placing the dishes, complimenting the lemon vinaigrette she'd prepared, as if we were in the middle of a pleasant dinner party and not the ghost of a reckoning. Marek sat to my left, and I felt the edge of his discomfort radiate down the length of the table. He didn't speak unless spoken to. When I passed him the water pitcher, our fingers brushed and he flinched. Only Ava was genuine. After dessert, she took my hand and tugged me away from the table with quiet urgency. Come see, she said, leading me into the sitting room. She opened her sketchbook and flipped through page after page, coastal scenes, pine branches, a page of overlapping eyes. At the very back was a sketch of the house, soft pencil lines, capturing the sweep of the porch and the way the trees leaned toward the roof. I looked at her and smiled. "You see everything I said." She beamed. A knock at the door interrupted us. I opened it to find Juna standing with a casserole dish in hand, wrapped in the same red towel she always used when it was still warm. "Left this last month," she said. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder, where Callista now stood, arms crossed, in the doorway behind me. Juna looked at her, then back at me. "Good to see the house full again." "Isn't it?" I said, accepting the dish. She gave me a tight-lipped smile and walked back down the path. Callista turned away without a word. Later that night, someone placed a mug of tea on the counter beside me without asking how I took it. It was overly sweet and lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. When I glanced at Marek, he looked quickly away. Marek found me in the kitchen after the others had gone to bed. I was rinsing teacups, stacking plates that hadn't been cleared. He leaned in the doorway, arms folded, like he'd been rehearsing his posture. "I should have said something," he mumbled. I didn't turn around. "About what? She didn't want you here," he said, voice low. "Callista said it'd ruin the energy. Said you'd make people uncomfortable." I dried my hands with the dish towel and faced him, "And you agreed." He looked down, then shook his head. "I didn't agree. I just didn't push back. I thought, I don't know. It was easier." "Easier," I repeated, tasting the word, for whom he didn't answer. Behind him, the hallway creaked. A shadow moved Ava, barefoot, notebook clutched to her chest. She hesitated, then stepped into the light. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop," she said quickly. "But I heard something earlier." Marek stepped aside as she crossed the room and stopped in front of me. "Mom was talking to Aunt Remy. She said," Ava hesitated, "she said you still think you matter, that we should just let you play host if it makes you feel useful." Marek closed his eyes briefly, like the words stung worse from his daughter's mouth than his wife's. I reached for Ava's hand. "Thank you for telling me. She's wrong," Ava added almost defiantly. "You do matter." The floor seemed to still beneath me. Marek looked at us both, his face raw. "This wasn't how it was supposed to go," he said. "I thought bringing everyone together would make it look whole." I finished for him, even if it wasn't. He nodded. I took a deep breath and squeezed Ava's hand. "Then maybe it's time someone else sets the tone." He watched as I turned back to the counter, sliding the last dish into place, the silence settling between us, not as a wall, but as something else. A quiet verdict. The next morning, I rose before sunrise and began preparing a brunch none of them had expected. I was up before the gulls. The house was quiet. Shadows still stretched long across the floors, but I moved with purpose. Eggs, fruit, coffee. I pulled out the heirloom platters Maeve once used for her garden luncheons and set the table on the deck with her old linens, soft from age, faded, but proud. By 8, the smells had begun to drift through the house. One by one, doors opened. Marek appeared, first hesitant in the doorway, then Ava, sleepy-eyed and smiling. Callista came last, her expression unreadable, as she took in the spread already half laid before her. "I thought it might be nice to invite a few neighbors," I said casually. And Juna had mentioned her sister-in-laws in town, so I said she could bring her. No one objected. Not allowed. By 9, the deck was full. Inez arrived with her sun hat and stories. Juna brought her sister-in-law, who turned out to have taught photography at a university in Vermont. I made introductions, served coffee, passed around the warm cinnamon bread I'd baked at dawn. I placed a small frame photo of Maeve near the drink station and a few old snapshots of her walking the shoreline in bare feet. This house was hers. Before it was mine, I told the group. She believed in filling it with art and conversation and the kind of laughter that doesn't depend on perfection. People nodded and something softened. A few guests asked to see more of the house. I led them through, showing off the view from the upstairs balcony, the tiny writing nook under the stairs. Ava stayed close. After the third time, someone complimented her sketchbook. She pulled me aside. "Would you teach me?" she asked. "Photography, the way you learned." I looked at her and smiled. "Of course I will." Across the deck, Marek watched us, hands in his pockets. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. Callista sat near the edge, her mouth drawn answering questions, with brief nods. The attention had shifted. The tone was no longer hers to control, and she knew it. After the guests had gone, and the house settled into its late afternoon hush, I stood on the deck with Ava and Marek beside me. Callista was still inside, nursing a glass of something she hadn't touched. The wind off the ocean carried just enough weight to make the silence feel intentional. "I've made a decision," I said, keeping my voice even. "Starting this fall, a portion of the rental income from the house will be donated to a local arts mentorship program." I turned to Ava. "In your name." Ava's eyes widened. "Wait, seriously," I nodded. "They're expanding a youth photography track. I thought of you." Marek looked at me, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That evening, after the dishes were cleared and the wine had softened everyone's edges, he asked if we could talk, just the two of us. We sat in the kitchen, the same spot where Aunt Maeve used to write grocery lists on the back of envelopes. Marek folded his hands on the table. "I'm tired, Mom," he said quietly. "Tired of pretending, tired of walking on eggshells, of managing everything around Callista so nothing cracks." I let the words sit. "She's not a bad person," he continued, almost like a defense he didn't fully believe. "But she needs everything curated, controlled." And he broke off, shaking his head. "I don't even know if I know myself anymore." I reached across the table and touched his wrist. "I'm not here to fix your marriage," I said. "That's not mine to carry. But you do have to decide what kind of life you want, whether you're building something honest or just maintaining the illusion of one." He looked up, then eyes wet but steady. "I miss how easy it used to be with you." "It was never easy," I said gently. "You just didn't notice when I was the one making it easier." We sat in silence until the sound of footsteps broke the moment. Callista entered, collected her coat from the chair, and left without a word. Marek didn't follow her. The next morning, I made coffee for two. By mid-morning, the goodbyes had begun. Suitcases wheeled down the gravel path, laughter forced into tidy farewells. No one lingered. They packed their curated memories back into their cars and left behind only the echo of what had never really fit. Callista didn't speak to me as she passed through the foyer. She didn't offer a glance, a nod, a strained thank you, just walked out, sunglasses on, keys tight in her grip. Marek stood by the door, watching her disappear down the steps. He didn't follow. Instead, he turned to me and pulled me into a hug, one that wasn't stiff or rehearsed, but full and wordless. I held him there long enough to feel something real move between us. When we let go, he didn't try to explain or apologize again. He just said, "I'll call you." Ava was last. She hugged me twice, then slipped a folded note into my hand like it was a secret. I waited until the car pulled away before I opened it. Thank you for being the only adult who listens. I pressed the paper to my chest for a moment, then placed it carefully in the drawer by the window seat next to the old photos of Maeve. The house grew quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of breath of things returned to their rightful rhythm. I brewed a second cup of coffee and left it on the table for no one in particular. Then I slipped on my sandals and walked down to the shoreline. The waves rolled in like they always had, patient and without need for applause. I let the water edge over my toes and looked back at the house, the windows glinting, the porch empty, the curtains stirring gently behind glass. This place had been a sanctuary, a secret, a silent witness to all the versions of me I'd tried to become. But now it wasn't just a retreat. It was a statement. The house, the silence, the surf, they were mine, entirely, unapologetically, not claimed by anyone else's permission or place cards. What do you do when you've spent a lifetime being left out, only to realize you were the center all along?